Hello. Hello, chat. What the fuck's going on with my goddamn hair? Actually, it doesn't look too bad this way. Okay. Hello. I didn't do one yesterday, but it's fine. I was out watching the All-Star game with a friend. Him and his partner are expecting a birth of their third kid soon. So he wanted to get out for one last hurrah before he goes on paternity for a bit. And of course, I'm gonna oblige him, you know? Gotta get out and see the friends, you know? Because I don't have a lot of time either before trade deadline starts getting really crazy. So, with all of that said, sorry I missed yesterday, but I feel like it's been a few days where I've had some relatively longer ones, you know, around an hour. As much as I love doing the super long format, I consider the hour long ones super long. I'm gonna try to keep them around 30 minutes, you know? Because, you know, it's just, it's not supposed to be a replacement of the stream or anything. It's supposed to just be some quick hitters. So, with all that said, 2 questions today. Might get to a third, but we'll start with the 2. First one is when you're working on a project and it's not going the way you thought it should go, and it's really just not moving in the way you think, when do you feel like it's time to start over? Like, at what point in time are you just gonna call it and move on to the next thing? Or not move on to the next thing, call whatever you're doing and try to rework it from a different way. So when you see a project is failing, how do you save it? So how do you walk it back and rework it? So first off, this probably happens more often than not. Not because there's poor planning, but because there are always unforeseen circumstances. What I'm about to say is probably a little spicy, but it's a known issue, and because of the scale of the work, it's hard to keep things consistent between all of these different systems. But in terms of ball tracking data, minor league data and major league data aren't necessarily equal in terms of quality. Whoa! So, of course, there are 30 Major League Baseball parks. 2 of the 30 Major League Baseball parks are also minor league parks, one being Steinbrenner Field, which is also a Florida State League park, and the other being Sutter Home Field, Sutter Home, in West Sacramento, where the Sacramento River Cats play, which is a Pacific Coast League park in AAA. So you have 2 parks with infrastructure for Major League Baseball ball tracking, player tracking, bat path tracking, biomech tracking, as instituted by Hawkeye. So Hawkeye is the provider of the cameras and collector of the data, and they ultimately send all of that data to Major League Baseball, who facilitates the organization of that data and ultimately pushing that data out to the clubs and also to the public. So you have your 30 teams with 30 Major League Baseball parks. But all the, or at least a vast majority, actually, I think all minor league parks have some sort of ball tracking, player tracking as well. Well over half of Major League Baseball minor league parks have what's called club-owned Hawkeye systems. So these are systems that clubs purchase, and this is independent from the league-owned and operated systems. So the 30 Major League Parks, AAA, also has league-owned and operated Hawkeye systems, but teams can purchase their own for all the other levels that are not owned and operated by, whose ball tracking, player tracking is not owned and operated by the league. For example, the Chattanooga Lookouts, which is a AA team for the Cincinnati Reds, they also have a Hawkeye system. They have it's just the same hardware as the Major League system, and the same hardware, and actually slightly better hardware than the league-owned and operated AAA system. And also the Florida State League systems, which are also league-owned and operated, as well as several of the sites in Arizona, which are for spring training and for Arizona Complex League, also owned and operated by the league. So Chattanooga, which in AA doesn't have any agreements with Major League Baseball to have that level tacked out with ball tracking and player tracking, clubs, organizations like the Cincinnati Reds have to purchase their own systems, install them in order to have player tracking, ball tracking, biomech, and all that stuff at these different affiliates. And so well over half, might even go on to say 2/3 of all of the minor leagues across all of the organizations have Hawkeye in their parks. And if they don't have Hawkeye, I would say they have something that's similar to Hawkeye, whether it's TrackMan or Yacker Tech or SMT or something like that. Simi, Kinetrax, etc. Kinetrax now owned by Hawkeye, but there was once upon a time where it was a separate company. So you have all these different systems. And if the prevailing system is Hawkeye, then you would go on to think that, oh, well, if you set it up just like the way that MLB sets it up, it's going to be the same, right? Well, not exactly, right? Like, think about a car manufacturer. A Jeep, all the Jeeps that were manufactured in 2024, some, for the most part, car to car, Jeep to Jeep, let's just say the Cherokee. Cherokee from car to car, Jeep to Jeep, pretty solid, like very good. These cars are good. Very few differences between them. However, it's possible that one Jeep during one processing, one building, one make from a particular factory included something for the seat. And the seat, the thing that makes the seat move up and down, the adjustability of the seat, let's say that wasn't, and this is hypothetical, it's good, do not go out and sue me for libel, Jeep. This is a hypothetical situation. Maybe we let's change the brand of the car. Let's say this is Meep, and the Meep Wahoo. Yeah, the Meep Yahoo. Yeah, there you go. And you got a bunch of Yahoos from Yahoo to Yahoo, Meep to Meep. They're all the same, except one production line made it so that the seat wasn't adjustable. So for that line of Yahoos, there's a recall. Like, okay, well, the seat doesn't work. You got to recall it, replace the seat, and now it's going to be better, right? Okay. Well, that doesn't mean there aren't other differences, right? Like maybe a large difference is the seat, but maybe a smaller difference is like they switched from a particular battery manufacturer for the Meeps to a different battery manufacturer for the Meeps, and so because there are different battery manufacturers and differences in the quality of battery, maybe the newest ones are actually a little better. A better bang for the buck. Okay, well, all those ones that came before it, they aren't necessarily as good, so there are differences there. So on and so forth. Maybe it's tires, maybe it's actual differences that you're paying into, like a different color or a different intake of some sort. But you can have all these slight differences, even though it's the same model Yahoo, right? That's not different from ball tracking, player tracking, and technology in general. From park to park, oh crap, it's like super raining. Wow. From park to park, you might have all the same or similar technology. Oh man. I should probably bring my trash can in. I should have done that before. I'll wait for this rain to kind of stop and I'll go out there and do it. So from Meep to Meep, you have some differences, but same thing with Hawkeye. From park to park, the different cameras, the way that it was installed, the different dimensions of a park, the different environmental factors of a park, the different housing of the hardware, electronics, cooling of the hardware, operators of the hardware, they all are a little different, right? Just like different tires, different colors on the car, different intake, different battery, different etc. And all these kind of add up to differences, right? So from one system to another, you won't have exactly the same measurement. You have something that's extremely close, but there are some slight differences. Where this manifests in terms of issues is when you're creating a model, and let's say the model, let's just invent a model. You're creating, let's see, an impossible model. All right, you're creating a model where you found this fantastic correlation between how a pitcher's leg, as it moves forward, the umpire reacts to the pitcher, and that's actually somehow affecting how a batter swings. So this pitcher umpire batter interaction requires this player tracking data, this 3D pose data that we get, and yes, we do get it on the umpires as well. And it requires an accuracy that you feel that Major League has a stronghold on. Extremely high quality, high signal for this model that you see, like, oh yeah, and this particular pitcher or pitchers with this stride throw a pitch, an umpire reacts this way, and the batter is able to hit a home run every time. Okay. So you make this model, and then you try to apply it down to the minors, but because the data quality isn't necessarily as precise or as accurate in these lower levels, and because Major League Baseball isn't necessarily maintaining the quality of these of the processing of the club-owned systems, these models tend to drift and ultimately start giving you information that doesn't seem correct. Now, rather than only a handful of pitchers who are giving up home runs, the model's saying, well, it's actually no pitchers do that, and the umpires are 9 feet tall now, and this number that you tell us actually is meaningless, even though you're saying once you pass a certain threshold, these batters should be hitting home runs every time. So now the coaches are mad. Now the players are mad. Now everyone's mad because what you said actually works, which it does in the major leagues, isn't working in all the other levels. Okay, so now you found a point of failure. You found a project that's failed. How do you walk that back? Well, first, you kind of know where the source is, right? Like, the source in this case is the quality of the data. And it's not necessarily how you're processing it. It's not necessarily the fault of Hawkeye or the league, because they're providing you with the hardware to do it. But the fact that there are these tiny differences suggests there needs to be some translation of the stuff that you're getting at these levels and some equating that to what the major league equivalency would be for that data, right? So if you're just a little off here, if the umpires are 9 feet tall elsewhere, is there some correction, depending on the park, that will allow you to move some of this back into that range that makes sense for the as it pertains to major league data, club or league operated data. And then you rerun the model and you see, oh, well, that helps a little. Now the umpires aren't 9 feet tall, but there's still all these other issues. Okay. You continue to work on this and you find like, well, there just are too many issues and too many differences in every single park, since every park is unique, every installation is unique, that this project is kind of, spiraling out of control. The scalability that we thought we were going to have, now it seems like it's only helpful at a select amount of parks, and while it's going to be helpful for the players at those parks, it's going to be difficult to train through these other parks. So what do you do? Now you have a project that ultimately has failed, right? There is some minimal success, the fact that it works at a select amount of parks, but in terms of player development, in terms of what the project requirements were from the start, this is now a failed project because you couldn't hit every single goal for scalability and for the things that player development need. So what do? Well, first, you got to take the wins where they exist. There are some successes here, right? It does work. And you've also identified some issues that do need fixing, which are other projects, and those create work for others. And these are not easy projects, correcting other systems and the data drift or the data distortion. That's a really difficult problem. So now you've created a lot of work for a different department if data engineering doesn't fall under analytics. So you've created two things, a successful project and a roadmap for a lot more work. Okay, I think. All right. Okay, we could do it. It's not as down. All right, it's still a little rainy chapter. It's fine. So you've created two things, and these are successes at the end of the day. These are ultimately positive. Your there is a success in the form of the project you made, and identifying gaps in your research or gaps in your pipelines is also positive, because if you didn't find these gaps, then they'd be lingering, and we're going to ultimately fail some other project along the way, right? So it's important to know that even though you didn't get the project success you thought you were going to get, you did have outcomes that were ultimately successful because they're going to provide better quality work later. So silver lining, there's that. However, what do you do about the other leagues? When do you know, like, what are you supposed to do, since you're going to wait for all this other stuff first before you could even dream on having it at these other levels? What do you do? Well, unfortunately, there's not much you can do. When a project has failed in that way, you kind of have to just write it up and say, well, here's the roadmap for success, but we won't be there for months, years, whatever. Okay. And ideally, that should be accepted. But in the case that it's not, that's where reprioritization comes into play. Let's say, well, no, we're not going to roll this out, and we're prioritizing this because it's important for our players to understand this nuance of baseball because it's a competitive advantage. Like, okay, well, now we have to reprioritize. So you put your team together, your leadership team, and you say, how do we do it where this is a top priority? And it might take a couple days to figure out who can do what work. You've made promises already to other groups, other teams about what you're going to deliver in what time frames. Now someone's coming over the top saying, you got to do this. Okay, well, you just got to do it. You got to figure out a way. And theoretically, a well-built team and multiple well-built departments, there shouldn't be any single points of failure in terms of people. So if you're able to pivot your group, and certain people can pick up the slack on other projects, and collaborative work makes it so no project will completely die on the vine, there's still going to be support for projects. It just might be slower. Then that's the best you can do, right? You work with what you got, and you throw the best people at the most high priority projects in order to get them done correctly and also quickly. And then you cross your fingers that you've trained everyone working on all the other projects well enough to execute them perfectly. And also, hopefully they do it quickly. So, but there isn't much else you can do other than rely on the people that you brought in. A lot of the time I see one big point of failure for team leads being they've hired a bunch of people to do so-called low-level work, entry-level work, etc. Because none of the so-called upper-level people want to do any of that work. So that creates an artificial divide on the team of people who are doing the so-called low-level work, and they are getting little to no interaction with people who are upper level. When you see this divide, you typically see also a different type of churn or people leaving the company. These projects become more compartmentalized, more isolated. It's important work for the entire team or the entire organization, but the ownership of it is falling upon lower level and mid-level people who rarely talk or introduce this work back up to leadership. So when this divide happens, it tends to make workers on these projects disgruntled, frustrated with their progress at the company, and it becomes a high churn role. So people come in, they're only there for a handful of time, maybe anywhere from 1 to 3 years, and then they leave for greener pastures, and you bring someone else in and you repeat this relatively toxic process. So if that's the situation people are finding themselves in, where the best people are working on the best projects and there is an artificial level, and then there's another group of people who are working on not the best projects, then it's going to be difficult to pivot your team when stuff like this happens. When an extremely important project is now on the table, now that top group who's expected to do it, they drop what they're doing to do it, but now all this other cool, important work is vacated. They don't have anyone who on the team that they trust to move into this role because they've created an artificial divide. So it's important to acknowledge that when you're building your team, you're hiring people, you're also trusting them to grow the direction of the department, because they're going to be theoretically there indefinitely, and you want people there for as long as possible to learn everything everyone knows in order for succession upward into the head of the department ultimately to be easy to do. People can rotate into different roles, different projects fluidly, and the separation of so-called lower level employees and upper level employees might be in terms of organizational hierarchy, but if you could get to a point where the projects themselves are more fluid and that groups of people from the very top to the entry level is also fluid, then you shouldn't find yourself in situations where projects that are failing and require more attention will leave the rest of your projects kind of stagnate. So on the managerial side of things, what do you do when a project's failing? Well, you gotta prop it back up and hope that all the other projects aren't going to fail either. Okay. I was going to talk about refactoring projects after you've learned models and like your models are really complex, and then your features along with the models are now complex. So what do you do when you have really complex models and a really complex feature set? But that might be for another day. Someone, if you're this far into this, remind me to talk about that. I talk about it a lot. A lot of people have seen my my figure of 7. The 7 graph is kind of what I've called it now. But it's feature complexity and model complexity, and ultimately the unicorn belief that you could go from feature complex and model, or feature rich and model complex, to feature rich and model simplified. But I guess we'll have to save that for another day. Someone remind me if you guys want me to talk about that. All right, one more. I know we're hitting 30 minutes now, but you know, this one shouldn't take that long. Someone asked about war. I'm actually surprised that I don't get asked about this more often. I am someone who is supposed to know everything about literally the one metric that takes into account every single thing a player is supposed to do and is the one number to measure everyone on, allegedly. But war. I know the question was worded in a way that was a little more technical, but I think the root of the question is when you're calculating war, like the idea of the R in war, which is replacement level, how do you go about calculating the replacement level? And this is like a very tenuous topic because it is the reason why different war metrics, at least some different war metrics, diverge. The idea of what is replacement level ultimately is like, what is your baseline, right? Now, a really simple way to think about this, in my opinion, is the idea of the replacement level being the baseline is somewhat vestigial and legacy, in my opinion. If you're debating whether or not the baseline should be whatever the lowest replacement level possible is for a particular position, you're probably losing the forest for a tree. And when you're trying to create some omnibus statistic that equates the value of a player and whether or not they're a good player, the idea that you're trying to set your baseline as something relatively subjective compared to all the other things that go into this value seems like you're wanting to set yourself up for vague interpretation in order not to be caught out for saying one player is better than another more objectively. This is like when people make bad faith arguments about like, oh, well, you didn't, you said best pitcher, but I really meant best starting pitcher. Like, okay, well, you could have just said that, but vague premise of argument allows someone to say, well, you're wrong still, and I'm still right. Which is upsetting because no argument should be about who's wrong and right. Rather, it should be about what is most objective and true to the true talent of a player, in which no one is wrong or right when it comes to statistics and facts. For example, you can't take away Cal Raleigh's 38 home runs. That is just fact. That is just what has happened. There is no argument. Now, for some, you might argue, well, he's playing in a weaker league, he's playing in a weaker division, the pitch quality he's facing is weaker. Well, you could make those arguments. They would be wrong. You can make those arguments. He's also pitching half of his games in one of the least hitter-friendly parks in the league. So we could always pick these subjective points to draw the line and say, is he actually good or not? But that doesn't get us anywhere. The fact is he actually has hit 38 home runs, right? So when it comes to what is the baseline, it's a little like that. Like, you're never going to please anyone when you choose a baseline because they believe a baseline should be something else. And so the way you select replacement level historically is you take AAA talent, and if you want to be really precise, you take AAA talent and conditional on the position that a player plays. So if you take a shortstop, look at all the shortstop AAA players. Okay. And then for all those players who made it to the big leagues, and played as shortstop, aggregate their talent, and now if the shortstop you're looking at is better than that AAA player, how much better? Now this is where a lot of people get like, if they're at least 1.5 WAR, then they're a major league average player. If they're 2 to 3.5 WAR, they're an everyday player and might sniff an all-star. If they're 2.5 to 4 WAR, they're one of the best. Like, okay, sure. But this is all assuming that the relative baseline for all shortstops now is this AAA player that's an aggregate of all AAA shortstops. Which, whether or not you want to believe that should be the baseline, at the very least, it is something that's consistent. You're taking many different players to create one baseline of a player. And because it's been relatively consistent, the number from year to year isn't volatile, which could be an issue, right? If your number isn't stable, then it's hard to put much weight into something that isn't stable. So that's historically one way you're doing it. Now, I think the question might be like, what would be a different way to do it? And this, I'm going to say a handful of things, and I will go on to say that publicly, these are things that people have tried, and these exist. None of them have been adopted by any major publication or syndicate. And we don't do any of these at the Reds. But these are absolutely ways you could do it, which in my opinion, may be more objective. So the easiest one is, why use a replacement level player at all? This should be the easiest one. What if you just took the major league player average? You know, like, you're messing around baselines and you're trying to say who's the best player, but your starting point's 1.5 WAR. It just seems like a odd statistic in general. Everything else is based off of like major league averages and plus or minus above or below the major league average. Why wouldn't you do that with this? Why is there an exception to wins above baseline? You know? So if your baseline is like, all right, well, take all major league shortstops with playing time of X amount. What is their average? And then compare every shortstop statistics plus or minus the aggregate of the average shortstop. And maybe you do it over a certain amount of years. That way you have a really large sample. Why don't you do it that way? You can. Is it going to directionally give you something similar that WAR gives you? Probably. You're measuring the same pool of players. You're just changing the baseline from A to B. And the baseline itself, if you're just subtracting these stats and dividing by some stats that are consistent, and the thing that ultimately changes is a one player value, then directionally, you're subtracting the same from all players, you're dividing the same from all players. Directionally, this should just be the same, right? Same thing with the next version of it. All right, well, maybe you don't like the average. Maybe you want something lower. All right, take a quantile. If you take all players in the league and you look at players between the 0 and 20th percentile at that position over the past 5 years or something, what's that in aggregate? Is that similar to replacement level? Is that better than that baseline? Is that worse? It might be. It might not be. But are you ultimately subtracting and dividing out the same number from every player? Yeah, you are. Okay. Well, what if you do it the opposite way? What if you took the MVP or the best player at that position based off OPS? Well, they'll even go one step further, based off xWOBA. You sort by xWOBA, you take the best player at each position from the previous year, and you use that as your baseline. Now you subtract, you divide, you come out with these really negative stats for the most part, but directionally, it's going to be the same. Arithmetic, in this case, is going to give you really similar things. So when it comes to like, how do you set what the baseline is and what that ultimately looks like for everyone else, I think it's important to know that like the most important thing about the baseline and the directionality of the baseline isn't the fact that it's the same number and the direction is going to be the same given the baseline. I think the more important thing, which again goes back to the argument of subjectivity, is the communication of the number. You're working with people who aren't going to be too happy if you say the best player in the league, given a baseline that is based off of last year's best player. The best player in the league is 0 WAR, and the next best player is -0.5 WAR. People are going to be like, what the hell are you speaking about? That's not going to fly. Similarly, if you use average player and you say, yeah, this player's WAR, wins above average, is 0.3, but in actuality, it's like 2.3, and that's actually a really good player. People are gonna scratch their head at you, like, what do you mean this guy's a 0.3 WAR player? He's an everyday shortstop. Well, you pick the different baseline. Directionally, it's the same. When you look at the numbers in a vacuum, it's all the same. But you're not using these numbers for anything internal related to quantitative stuff. You're using these numbers typically to communicate the value of a player throughout your team or your organization in a way that's supposed to translate to like, is this player good or not, to people who don't know statistics, don't know quantitative analysis, don't know machine learning or any modeling at all. You're communicating to people who are open to all of it, but know none of the underworking. So when it comes to picking the right baseline and what's the most quantitatively advanced and accepted baseline, it's less about whether you're getting it perfectly right and more about whether or not the communication of the values are closer to talking about a player's true talent. I'll give one little insight that most people don't have. When it comes to valuing a player, since teams have way more data than the public does, the value of WAR internally to most teams, well, I won't say most teams, but some teams, very different than the value of WAR in the public space, because the public space doesn't have stuff that we have. They don't have information about biomechanics. They don't have information about all of the scouting reports that all the scouts have on players. They don't have information from strength and conditioning and all sorts of different athletic measures that we have. They don't have access to any of that. And so when you create a model that suggests how good a player is, and you're using more than just results at the end of the day, your numbers are going to be different too. But what is a replacement level player when you're using something like bat speed or sprint speed in a particular model? It's a good question. What is your baseline for this? And what's a value that you're ultimately going to weight in your omnibus wins model. And how much a player is going to win for you, again, that might be relative to a different baseline. So this is all to say that communication of the statistics that you're presenting is always going to be more important in terms of usage than what the underlying stat is. I'll leave with a cautionary tale. Someone in the football community is really good at communicating through social media and to coaches and to players statistics, making numbers, making lists, creating reports that are specific and also like nice to read, easy to understand. However, the larger analytics community say, hey, those aren't really good stats. Those aren't really good lists. The numbers that this person's pulling isn't really good. But this person is the most clouded analyst in the NFL community as it is. So how do you win? Well, you don't. This person is going to be trusted by people who are convinced their infographics and tweets and reports and lists are all signal to acquiring better players, setting up better plays, etc. Where smarter people, better, more rigorous analysis, and people who create those analyses, they see through that. And even though their work isn't as popular, they are quantitatively better assessors of players, plays, talent. Okay, but where do those people ultimately end up? The thing that separates someone who has better communication skills from someone who doesn't is perhaps the difference between someone who is well respected in the locker room and on a team versus someone who tweets a lot. And that's unfortunately the dilemma that people who have the nicest, shiniest data visualizations, the people who have the most amount of followers, they get conflated with the people who have the best information. And that's just not true. Just like in baseball, the best baseball player is probably not playing baseball. You know, like the Babe Ruths, the Ted Williams, the Barry Bonds of our eras. How many more were there? And they just didn't have the access to baseball. It's probably many. Similar to analysts. There are probably many fantastic analysts who are out there. And I know many of them. But they might not be working on teams, mainly because they aren't putting themselves out there in these social media communication ways. And that's okay, because hopefully once I get headcount, I hire them. But for them, that's obviously not something that they want. They want to just be hired as soon as possible and help a team win a championship. Which I hope they do. I hope they do get hired and help a team win a championship. So when it comes back to war and communicating information, your best communicators are going to be able to take any of these large, important statistics and communicate them evenly, equally, make everyone understand why it's important. They're going to do the best at that. However, the ones who lean a little too heavy into being right quantitatively and lose sight of being able to communicate the information, they are going to flounder a little more and be upset and frustrated that their stuff isn't being taken more seriously. I encountered someone like this not long ago, and it was actually pretty remarkable for me. This person, I'm not going to reveal who this person was or is, but they were given a platform and communicated. I mean, they're extremely famous in this space, in the space that they work in. Like, extremely well-known person, extremely well-recognized name, and kind of like starstruck to see that this person is like talking and reading off this information to all of us. And the communication of it was just so poor. The communication of it was, you could see in everyone's faces and how it was unraveling, and how disappointed the people who brought this person in were with how this person communicated, and ultimately fumbled their opportunity to have a say with the team. And I got dinner with this person. I was out to dinner. I talked to this person after the meetings, and they kind of understood, like, I understand that I wasn't doing the best in there, but people aren't ready for my information. Like, in my mind, I'm trying to be nice. I don't know this person, so I'm not going to tell them how completely wrong or bad their presentation was. But in my mind, I was like, well, it's not the fact that it didn't land well here. It's the fact that I think you've been given a lot of opportunities, and do you think there's something else behind the opportunities you're given that make it seem that you just aren't going to fit on a team? This person's been in the industry for longer than I've been alive. And they're like, I don't know, I'm just going to keep working on it. And I'm like, all right, well, you should. And people should. But the honest feedback is how ardently, how important your information is, and how much of an ardent supporter you are of it. You are doing a disservice if your support is communicated incorrectly, or at some points in time inappropriately. Maybe, and when I say inappropriate, I mean you're grasping at straws when you don't really need to. You're trying to make something bigger than what it actually is. And really, when it comes to coaches and players, they want good information that's actionable, and if it helps them win, they're going to try to find a way to use it. But if you're lecturing them and doing your part of over-communication, which I've said is a good thing to some extent, but it comes off as like disparaging or condescending in some ways, and people are just going to be turned off to that completely, right? Think about the difference between your most favorite teachers and your least favorite teachers. The least favorite teachers, it's not like their content is any different than the teacher next door. Like, they're both teaching about the American Civil War. It's, Abraham Lincoln, Stonewall Jackson. Like, you got the same big things across all of these chapters. But why is one teacher better than the other? Well, one teacher makes it easy for you to understand because they're communicating better, and the other teacher isn't. And that's ultimately the point when it comes to war. The people who are making up any statistic, the better communicator you are, typically the more adopted your stuff's going to be. And that is above whether or not your stuff is the most accurate. It's unfortunate, but that's what it is. I mentioned this a few pods ago where I said a lot of people, even in the analytics world, prefer talking about OPS as opposed to WOBA, because WOBA, while more accurate, is still so similar and close to OPS that OPS is just so much easier to talk about. Everyone can understand it, and you could dissect it down into two components, on base and slugging. WOBA, you can't. It becomes a little harder. And because of the difficulty there, not a lot of people like using WOBA as the communication statistic. And that's fine. Still a good stat, just not the one you want to talk about. Similar here. Sometimes the person who's the most right isn't necessarily the person who's going to be the best or the most effective communicator. So when it comes to war, be more like OPS and less like WOBA. Even though WOBA might be better, OPS is more effective when it comes to communication. Okay, I promised that this was going to be shorter than an hour. We are 3 minutes under, so did not think it was going to go that way, chat, but alas. So I'm going to go play PvE Teamfight Tactics now, because the new set's out and there's been a hot fix, so I'm going to go do that for the rest of the day. But I'll do another one of these tomorrow. I fly out tonight, and so tomorrow I'm either going to do this in Arizona before I go in, or I'll do this in Arizona at the end of the night. So again, I love that people are enjoying this. People coming into the stream saying they like this. It's been really nice. People giving me a little more feedback on it, like the format is good. That's been good. So if you do enjoy it, let me know. And if you got questions, you could ask them in the comments. I do read the comments. I know I'm not good at replying or thumbs upping comments, but in the comments, if you got questions that you want me to tackle for other ones, let me know. Or in the Discord or in chat. Anyway, I'll catch you all tomorrow.